You've probably heard, read, or even adhered to certain rules of dress throughout your life. But do you know the history behind them? Dress codes, broadly speaking, refer to the norms, rules, and formulas that determine how we dress. Legally, dress codes might have their origins in sumptuary legislation, which put briefly is the set of laws intended to restrict consumption and display according to social group or status. While we think about them in terms of inappropriate excess, they seem to have been oriented towards separation and categorization, at least initially. Some of the earliest examples of sumptuary legislation that we know include requirements for Jews and Muslims to wear distinctive clothing in Spain before 1492, the prohibition of quote-unquote barbarian Mongol dress in Han China, or the permission or prohibition for prostitutes to wear certain styles across Europe. The categorization of people into separate social groups was especially important within European colonial expansion around the globe. Dress codes now became not just a tool to separate human beings into different groups, but most specifically to distinguish colonizers from the colonized. In 16th century Spanish Americas, for example, indigenous people were required to modify their dress to adapt to European moral standards that forbid showing much of the body's skin, while also maintaining visibly distinctive quote-unquote Indian characteristics, thus creating a sort of hybrid style that often combined European shifts, petticoats, and breeches with garments such as the Inca licla and unku or Mayan and Aztec huipiles. In 19th century British India, a whole military uniform was designed to conform with English stereotypes of Indian culture. These characteristics were embodied in particular in the turban that symbolized the quote controlled wildness, fierceness, and willingness to obey of Sikhs recruited for the British Army. Ironically, when both Indian and Dinka people became to be perceived as dangerous enough to the establishment, the garments that once separated them were prohibited, in part at least to avoid identification among themselves, unification, organization, and ultimately rebellion. And what does all of this have to do with our dress codes in our times, you may ask? Well, the answer is a bit complicated, but in general terms, it has to do with the fact that even if dress codes are not always legally imposed, our global standards of elegance and even more basic appropriateness are dictated upon white Euro-North American conceptions of dress and manners. Until very recently, indigenous Congress people in most South American countries were prohibited from wearing their native clothes because they were perceived as inappropriate for government affairs. Sikh boys and Muslim girls in English schools were sent back home for not complying to uniform rules when wearing a turban or a veil. Native American young men are forced to cut their long locks in North American schools, and Black women are both implicitly and explicitly discouraged from wearing their naturally curly hair in and beyond contemporary professional environments. So, what do you think about dress codes now that you know a bit of the history behind them?